Still doesn't quite feel like I'm able to jump in and start on July 1st.
We get to see July 1st happen as medical students and see how a lot of interns really struggle with some basic skills.
I am very worried about looking foolish in front of the nurses, looking foolish in front of the patients.
The nurses expect you to be the doctor, the patients expect you to be the doctor, your colleagues expect you to be the doctor.
And I don't have anybody else to run it by or to help me think through it. And I know that situation on July 1st is probably going to happen, or if not, July 2nd or July 3rd.
Trainees must squeeze every ounce of learning from clinical experiences. Given the rapidly changing hospital environment, it is essential to explicitly design integrated, meaningful clinical experiences to prepare trainees for independent practice. Web Initiative for Surgical Education of Medical Doctors was launched in 2004 to provide students with critical exposure to the full range of clinical cases during their surgical clerkship. In 2014, in response to an increasing concern about medical students' readiness for residency, our team created NYS-onCall. NYS-onCall is targeted at enhancing the ability of novices to address common clinical coverage issues. In 2016, we designed Night-onCall to both enable students to practice and us to measure clinical reasoning skills in a series of simulated, situated clinical events structured together with NYS-onCall. In 2014, the Association of American Medical Colleges challenged medical educators to ensure that new interns entering residency demonstrate competence in 13 core and trustable professional activities. The Night-onCall project is our most recent initiative to better understand our medical students' competence. The Night-onCall project is also the first phase in our study of situated mixed modality experiences, where the trainee is exposed to deliberate integrated experiences that are anchored in a common, authentic clinical problem and range in the instructional design features, offering trainees diverse and meaningful clinical learning experiences. Night-onCall is a 4-hour simulation of the on-call experience. First, a research staff member discusses the project and addresses any questions or concerns that the student may have before signing the IRB-approved consent. Then, the student is on call.
Learners, welcome to your Night-onCall.
He first returns a page from a nurse. He is given an opportunity to ask the nurse clarifying questions before entering the room to assess his first patient. The student then interacts with the patient and discusses lab values, ECGs, imaging results, and simple bedside procedures with the nurse. The student writes a brief, structured coverage note and calls the covering attending to discuss the case. Since students often struggle with establishing a working differential diagnosis, the student in the Night-onCall study then watches a NYS-onCall module specific to the clinical issues. The modules provide him with a decision-making framework to approach the next clinical case he will encounter. He then receives a second page. It is another patient presenting with a similar clinical case but a different underlying cause. The student evaluates the patient, discusses immediate management with the nurse, and writes his coverage note. But not all cases are this straightforward. The third time the student is paged, the patient is more worrisome. The purpose of this encounter is to challenge the student to both recognize and manage the urgency in this situation. After seeing 3 patients, the student is given 15 minutes to formulate a clinical question and answer it by using online literature sources. As the student does this, a medical librarian is watching remotely and assessing the student's ability to use the literature in this way to ultimately improve patient care. The student then receives his final page of the night from the supervising resident. He is told to go and obtain consent from Mr. Smith for an invasive diagnostic test. The purpose of this case is to challenge the student to demonstrate ability to conduct an ethical and legal informed consent conversation for an unfamiliar procedure. When he enters the patient's room, he finds that there is a second adult at the bedside. The student must confirm that it is appropriate to have this discussion in the presence of the second adult before respectfully and meaningfully engaging both men in this conversation.
And you're comfortable discussing all this with them?
Yeah.
Great.
After seeing his final patient, the student hands off the clinical responsibility for these 4 patients to the incoming intern. The Night-onCall finishes with a debriefing and discussion of all activities that took place. Results of this project will help inform our understanding of the current readiness to practice challenge and the impact of instructional interventions on students' preparedness for independent practice.